Great to get the win, he says. Much better second half. But why do we only force the opposing defense to defend 20 yards of the field? Did we have any passes more than 15 yards down the field? Boy, I love this question. Because, Don, you and I had a conversation at halftime. I asked you, Don, I said, what does Iowa do? Because Minnesota's sending 5. I thought sometimes 6. You told me more often than not 5. They were sending an extra guy. And it's hard. Even though you have 5 offensive linemen, the center is at a disadvantaged position to help and pick up that 5th man. It's difficult. And sometimes you don't know where the pressure is coming from. So I asked you, Coach, what do you do in this situation? Because Cade's not getting time. Not that Cade was great in the first half, but his numbers were really impeded by the pass rush. And I believe you said something along the lines of, maybe you find a man beater. And Iowa hasn't had many individuals that I would consider to be man beaters. They really didn't do that in the second half, but I thought there were little adjustments from Tim that we saw, especially in that first drive of the second half, that included a throw on first down on the first play of the drive that I thought really changed the complexity, and it just put Minnesota back on their heels a bit.
Well, let me say this, Corey. Don't think that a man beater is a play that's always going to produce a touchdown. When I talk about man beaters, I simply mean plays that give the defensive play caller a lot of reason to question whether or not he should continue doing it. Let me give you a couple of examples. 3rd and 6 on the -31. Probably still in the third quarter. Minnesota plays man free. We throw an inside fade to RVZ.
Great example.
Plus 18. That's a man beater. Why is that a man beater? Because we got an inside receiver that's running a fade route versus a safety. Not a corner, but a safety. It's a better matchup. Cade put the ball up nice and high. Our guy played the ball. Their guy didn't, right?
And an undersized safety, right? A guy who's disadvantaged from a height position.
Sure. So you look for mismatch, and that was a mismatch, at least in terms of height. Here's another good example that gets away from the passing game, but just give you an idea of what I'm talking about. I don't believe we ran our counter a single time in the first half. That was a 40-yard touchdown. Our counter, we pulled the guard and the tight end. Remember that? Not in the first half we didn't. Second half we did. One thing we did not get away from, we came back to it more than once, is naked. We ran naked into the boundary for a nice gainer. And it wasn't the simple front side naked. It was the tight end who's a wing back on the other side of the formation, coming all the way underneath. It's a very deceptive play. Obviously, he might get dropped in coverage, right? Because he lined up on the other side of the ball. Good job by Winston on the reverse. That was a good call. We did a lot of things to keep him off balance. 100 on the 9. First and goal at the 9-yard line. We faked a fly sweep and went Q-sweep for 4 yards.
That made me nervous. That play made me a little nervous.
Yeah, the ball was up floating in the air a little too long, but thankfully we just did a nice job of filling the ball, and we were okay.
So, Don, how would you address this statement from this question from Kevin about forcing the defense to defend more than 20 yards of the field? Do you still feel like there's a need to figure out a way to push the ball downfield, even if it doesn't always result in completions?
Absolutely, and I realize some of our guys are not very capable of scaring a team deep downfield. But there are other ways to do it. It's not always just based on speed. I will go on record as saying, I think Caleb Brown can scare people down the field. I think Winston can scare people down the field too. Both those guys run well enough. And beyond that, it doesn't have to always be a fast guy to scare people over the top. A simple double cut with a great route runner does it. We had guys like Billy Havel and Scott Helverson way back in the 80s. They weren't that fast, but after you started to wear teams out with underneath cuts, sometimes those guys went over the top simply because they were such good route runners. You know, that they bit on the short route and they were beaten deep by a guy that's not that fast, but he understood how to run routes. It wasn't just a simple thing to do. You also made a point of flashing your hands. As you broke on an out route, you flashed your hands in anticipation of the ball. There wasn't going to be a ball coming, but he doesn't know that. If you flash your hands, he'll turn and look for the ball, at which point you got him beat over the top. Little stuff like that. It does add up.
He wanted me to ask this question, but I see he threw it up in the chat. He says, Coach, is lack of ball going downfield a scheme issue, a play issue, or a McNamara issue? And let's see. Let me see if he added to that. Please ask Coach Patterson why McNamara does not ever throw the ball down the field. What do you have to say to Kevin? Don, that's a fair question.
Well, a lot of our schemes are designed for the ball to be thrown short or intermediate routes. Logically, you would think that those should have a higher completion percentage than a longer throw. There's a lot of truth to that. Sometimes maybe we aren't calling plays that'll send the receiver way down the field because we're simply not sure we have enough, can buy the quarterback enough time to get the ball downfield. And then let's not kid ourselves. Part of our problem is we have a hard time finding a matchup that we can have great confidence in because it's always a function of those guys that are covering us. That's going to be a challenge for Ohio State. I don't know anything about Ohio State's secondary, but it's safe to say they have access to really good athletes. Not hard to imagine that some of those matchups are going to be difficult to beat if they choose to man up and pressure us. We have to have a plan for that. I don't even know how much they've pressured this year, but it seems like their defense is doing a better job than what they've done in the past. In the past, it seemed like they weren't too concerned about it, and they simply thought they were going to outscore you anyway, and they often did.
Coach, is there any reason Kirk would not trust Sullivan between the 20s but trust him in the red zone? Seems backwards.
Well, let's face it. Let's just go back to the Iowa State game. One thing that showed up there, we are, well, and I mentioned our numbers even from the last couple of years. We were not very good in the red zone. We were 11th in the Big Ten last year out of 14 teams. So it's not a problem that's new just because of Tim Lester. I mean, we had a problem a year ago and 2 years ago with red zone scoring success on offense. So logically, we talked about it. It's difficult to move the ball down there. If you try to throw the ball and they're only rushing 3, you got 8 defenders, 8 fence posts in there, and the throwing lanes are really tight. And it's not very far to the end line either, especially when you're inside the 5. So that's a problem. And if you think the solution is just to run the ball in, well, that's a little bit of a problem too because they've got more tacklers near the ball than you have blockers. So that's a little bit of a problem too. One thing you can do to bother them a little bit more and make yourself a little more difficult to defend, is it possible you can do something to make the quarterback a bigger threat to even become a ball carrier? And the obvious answer is yeah. Put in Brendan Sullivan, because we know that he's effective in running the ball, and I hate to say he's more expendable than our starter, but obviously if we're trying to put a lot of stuff on our starter's plate, that might just simply be exposing him to more risk than he already has. So it's a little bit like sharing the position among running backs. Is there anything wrong with having a good backup running back? Of course not. Same thing can apply to quarterbacks. And the advantage when we put number 1 on the field, and last week was a good example. I was probably like our opponent was. I think Troy was probably thinking, okay, let's see Sullivan run the ball now. And what we did initially, we used him as a decoy. Yep. And a critic would have said, well, you put him in, you just let him hand the ball off. Yeah, but maybe Troy was expecting him to keep the ball, which made the guy with the ball better positioned to score points. So it just makes it a little more difficult to defend because it's not quite as obvious if we're running the ball. It's not quite as obvious that it's going to be jersey number 2 or jersey number 9, whoever.
Matt says, what average stat line does Cade need to be at to have a successful outing? What's reasonable?
Well, it depends on the game situation.
Game by game, right?
Yeah. Today we didn't need, we had so much success with our running game, and we developed a lead that was very secure in the second half. We didn't need to throw the ball very much. On the other hand, if we're playing from behind by 2 touchdowns, we may have no choice but to try to somehow make the game last longer. And best way to do that, of course, is to throw the ball and hopefully complete a lot of them too. Just for the record, Corey, those 25 parameters that I keep track of for every game, the lowest 2 winning percentages happen to be passing yardage and more completions. Those are ranked 24th and 25th. That's how insignificant passing yardage really is.
We don't like seeing 62 yards.
Don't like to see 62, but you don't like to see, let's just pick a number. You don't like to see 200 that's based on 50 pass attempts either, because that's 4 yards per attempt. That's not good.
I'd rather see 62 passing yards versus 62 rush yards for Iowa.
Yeah, that's true.
Kyle Hawk says, Coach P, I thought 12, Cade McNamara managed the game and did what was asked. How can we get his confidence going in the right direction?
Maybe throw a little more early downs, high percentage passes. Maybe take advantage of some play action opportunities. Right now, I wish we had more play action than we have. We roll out a lot, with naked. That's a good thing to do, of course, the way our offense is set up. But I think just give Cade a chance to get outside the pocket. I think he's a little more comfortable throwing on the run, perhaps. And what would help us a lot with any quarterback's confidence is try to avoid third and long, third and extra long. That's hard. Hard to play quarterback then. It's hard to be a good play caller, too, if you're looking at a lot of third and long, third and extra long.